Great. Good morning, everyone. I am going to call to order the Town of Telluride Town Council budget meeting. It is Thursday, August 29th. It is 9:02 a.m. We are online as well as in person in Rebecca Hall at 113 West Columbia Avenue in good old Telluride. First thing we'll need to do after that call to order is go with the roll call, starting to my right.
Ellen 11.
Geneva Shawnet. Ashley Von Sparken.
Dan and Wright.
And Teddy Erico. First item on the agenda, number 1, is a work session, and it's an overview of the 2025 budget. And we have Kaylee and Zoe to present.
Thank you. And of course, Colette as well.
Colette.
Big thank you to our finance team and all of our departments for getting us started on our budget season. What we're going to do with today's meeting is give council and the listening public an overview of our 2025 budget. What this is really to get you all familiar with our budget so that when we have these conversations, you understand, how our different funds work, where our different revenues go, and kind of the state of our budget. So just a foundational educational piece to get us moving through our budget season. So with that, just a quick overview. So we'll talk about the process expectations and goals, our fund balance and reserves, tax forecast, and an overview of the funds. So to start with budget process and expectations, as we mentioned during our goals and objectives meeting just 2 days ago, the town manager met with the directors to identify the departmental needs through our budget retreat. This also helped us build out our action items for the year. The departments are currently preparing the initial draft of the balanced budget, which is due annually on December 1st. So we've already gotten all the departments have put in their request for the year. Our fiscal policies, just as a reminder, is that our general fund reserves need to meet or exceed our targets. The RET and sales tax. So RET is placed ahead of the budget and sales tax is pacing, ahead of the budget this year. And sales tax is currently pacing 2.5% below the budget. However, we haven't put our lodging tax in. So we'll see kind of how that shakes out. We did budget, just as a reminder, 5% over last year. So we'll see where we land on that. Our budget approach is always to focus on accuracy and to avoid conservative or aggressive estimates. It is really important to try to estimate our revenues as close as possible and get our expenses as close as possible. In our capital investments, we recommend funding deferred maintenance for facilities, streets, and safety. And that's what our capital investment is. So our budget process, to continue with that, staffing. So we prioritize recruitment and retention. Our tax exemptions are based on peer input and trends. We look at we work with the tourism board to understand our lodging metrics and those forecasting. We look at other peer communities and what they're looking at from a sales tax perspective and larger economic targets as well to help base our tax assumptions. Our capital investment. So again, these are significant needs for upcoming projects, and they may require alternative funding. We have great examples in front of us, not just including, but we have a lot of streets projects, our wastewater treatment plant, our gondola. Those are examples of our capital investments. A reminder from our open space bonds, we paid off our open space bonds in 2023, and we reallocated 15% to the reserve capital improvement fund. We also have a new fund, the Child Care Fund, as the town now manages Elaine's Place from January 1st, 2024, and our housing remains a top priority. So those are some of the key things you'll see throughout our budget. So I think I'll pass it. Do you want me to keep going or do you guys want to?
Yeah,
Okay.
take over now. So our goals of the budget process are mainly to present a balanced budget to you guys. This means that our recurring revenues should equal or exceed our recurring expenditures. in order to ensure long-term financial sustainability for the town. In Colorado, we do have requirements that cities and towns are required to prepare, present, and maintain balanced budgets. So this means if additional revenues are required to balance the budget, new revenue sources must be approved or fund balance is drawn down. But we don't want to be drawing down on our fund balance every year. We want to get to the point where we can have a balanced budget annually. And if additional revenues cannot be realized, then expenses must be reduced either through service reductions or the elimination of programs and purchases. And if we are drawing down on the fund balance, we should have a plan in place to replace that within 5 years. This is, again, just a timeline of our hopeful presentations to council for the budget, where we started with the budget retreat. You guys saw the goals and objectives on Tuesday. Overview today. We're hoping to have a full overview of all the budget with numbers for the next meeting on September 17th. And then general fund on September 19th, capital fund October 3rd, all of our enterprise funds October 8th, all other funds October 17th, and then hopefully passing the budget on November 19th. We do have some fund balance reserve policies in our most recently adopted town council financial planning policies, which were probably adopted about 10 years ago now. So it's been a while since they've been updated. But our general fund, the policy is to have at least 30% reserves in that fund. And that is the fund balance as a percentage of our total expenditures. And this target has been as high as 35% in the past. This year, the budget has a 50% reserve, a little over $8 million or 6 months of operating expenses. And then in our capital fund, the financial planning policies state that we should hold reserves of at least 25% of the fund balance, which right now we've built up a pretty large fund balance in our capital fund. So that 25% is pretty big. So this year we decided that 14% was good, or $2.2 million. So now we'll just kind of move on to give a little overview of each fund and some major talking points in those funds. Our general fund, you can see here, we've budgeted quite a bit lower for our fund balance than how we've actually come in. The light green is our actual audited numbers, which have come in quite a bit higher, which is great, but we'd like to get to the point where we're budgeting more accurately. And our general fund accounts for all financial resources of the town, except those required to be accounted for in other funds. It is the town's primary operating fund, so we really want to keep an eye on these expenses and fund balances.
Kaylee, do you have an idea of why it's such a big gap? Or is it, I know in the past it's been like unfilled positions.
That's been a big part of it. Yeah, some vacancies. And then also until this year, we were budgeting very conservatively on our revenues. So
Yeah, most of it is revenue based, just being
Yeah.
very conservative on what we're bringing in. So
So bringing in more rather than spending less
correct. Yep.
on
So
that scale.
yeah, in the past, we
Yes.
had less revenues and more, our expenses are fairly accurate and we're honing in on those, but our revenues had a lot to make up. So we're being a little bit more aggressive in how we're budgeting our revenue expectations.
And I would throw out that we've definitely had a lot of debates on council about Adrian and I, and maybe Dan too, I can't remember, have thought, I'll just say Adrian and I for sure have been confident that the economy is going to keep doing well. And then we have folks who are worried that, it's not going to do well, or houses aren't going to sell. Visitation's down, or sales tax is going to go down because visitation's down, but we just have not seen that yet. So
And when we,
nobody has the crystal ball, but
yeah.
I wouldn't say that like we all 100% have agreed on what we should budget for next year.
No,
We'll
we
see.
We'll
definitely-
argue about it here shortly.
Yeah. We obviously budgeted for 2024, a 5% sales tax, and we'll find that out, but obviously we're behind that mark at the moment. So we're still kind of working that out. But when we did decide to budget that is because we looked at the average of our sales tax increases, and there was always an increase every year. There had only been, I think, 1 year in the last 10 years where it was,
COVID, yeah.
yeah, where it was near flat.
Do we ever kind of adjust, see adjustments, like just presented to us for inflation? Because sometimes it looks like there are really big jumps, but it's just because the cost of goods have gone up. It's not that there's like, 10 more, 10x of things being sold. It's just that the price has increased.
We did do that a couple years ago, and our sales tax increases did not trend with
Didn't
inflation
follow.
at all, but
I'm just
we could
wondering,
definitely put together something
In
like that.
current
again this
years,
year.
obviously, we've seen much more significant inflation. Just be
Yes.
interesting to see if there's a little bit of correlation there as we're projecting, just to say, well, we're not sitting at 2% inflation. Or maybe closer to 5, or
Mhm.
whatever that is. I don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, we can definitely put that together again for an upcoming meeting. And our short-term rental sales tax, the due date was August 20th. So we're just working on getting all that in, see what our sales tax looks like overall with those in there. But it'll take us a little while, the new system. And this is just a 10-year graph of the general fund balance. Okay, capital fund. The capital fund accounts for general government capital projects and outlays, economic and cultural development, public works and government facility maintenance, and transportation subsidies. It's financed primarily by the 3% real estate transfer tax. And again, we can see here that we've been budgeting pretty conservatively, and also the last 2 years, we just have not been able to get the projects completed that we've budgeted. So we've built up a large fund balance of about $11 million right now going into this year. And a large part of that is our real estate transfer tax revenues being budgeted lower than they've come in. So for sales taxes, Zoe mentioned, we are down 2.5% from budget, but up 2.5% year over year from 2023. January through April, we've seen small increases this year. May and June, we've been down a little bit, and then July looks like it's going to be up a little from last year again.
That's without taking into account
That's without.
short-term rentals. So
But
once those
just-
get input, it's gonna go way up, or
This doesn't include short-term rentals at all.
in either calculation.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
yes. And then, yeah, you can see we've been consistently increasing. 2020, we had a slight drop during COVID, but other than that, our sales tax has increased every year. Our real estate transfer tax. So for this year, we budgeted 6.2 million. As of today, we are at 6.18 million. So we should be well over that by the end of the year. So we would just recommend not budgeting that one too conservatively for next year. And here's that graph where our budget is quite a bit lower than how we actually came in, especially COVID in 2021, 2020 and 2021. We had record real estate transfer tax revenues, and it's slowed down, but still higher than it ever has been. And this is just a great overview of all of our governmental funds. We have, I think, 15 total governmental funds right now. So it's a lot to keep track of, and we'll go over each one of them with you guys. But our major funds are our general fund, capital fund, open space, affordable housing. Those are our largest funds. And then our proprietary funds, these are our enterprise funds, our water and wastewater funds, Shandoka, Virginia Placer, Sunnyside Voodoo, and then our parking enterprise fund. Okay, again, the general fund is the town's primary operating fund, paying for the town's core administrative and operational tasks. 71% of our revenues are made up of taxes, and that is, a majority of that is sales and use tax. Property tax is also in there, and that is something in our general fund that cannot increase more than 7% annually for this general mill levy.
Yeah, I think that's really important for council to understand, especially given the property tax increases that our region has seen and the narrative of how much property tax the town is getting.
Valuation increases, not property taxes.
Thank you. Yes, evaluations.
Not
Yeah.
for this one, yes.
But what the town is able to collect. We have a limit based in our town charter of that 7%.
Do you kind of? Can it, so if the valuations go up a certain amount and we can collect 7% more than the previous year, and then the following year we could collect 7% more until you get caught up.
You're limited. I don't know if we necessarily get caught up.
Yeah.
We,
Never catch, is that sort of?
Yeah,
what
can you
you're saying?
explain this? I'm a little
Yeah.
confused, sorry.
But yeah, that's just in our charter that we can only increase what we collect in this general property tax mill levy by 7%, but I don't know that we'll ever catch up with
And then do we issue
where we
rebates
should have
when,
been.
if we exceed?
No,
that
every year
7%?
we just have to submit to the county what our mill levy is. So we back into the mill levy based on how much property tax revenue we can collect for the
And
year.
then they remit that amount of money to us.
I see.
But then we also have one that goes to the Affordable Housing Fund, which is just 2 mills. So that one will go up based on property tax valuations. This is the only one that won't.
So if property tax valuations, for argument's sake, go up 50%.
This one can only go up 7%.
It can go up 7% this year and it can go up 7% next year, and then there will be another valuation that might make it go up even more. And we can still only go up 7%.
so the town has had this in place since 1978.
78.
So since that time, the town has definitely not been collecting the full amount of property tax revenues because of the 7% limit.
Might be good to put that in an easy to understand way for the public. So
Mhm.
we say this is what we could be collecting if we didn't have this limit.
And
this
we
is
did
what
a,
we're
s-
collecting.
and we can do that. We did a story with the newspaper specifically around that.
Yeah.
And we can maybe make that a little bit more public. Rehash that.
Is this another one of those things that's like unique to Telluride, or is it something that other municipalities across the state do?
Sorry, that sign wasn't.
Okay.
The sign.
I think it's pretty unique to Telluride.
Okay.
I haven't experienced it elsewhere, or heard of it. I don't know, Kevin, if you have, you know, too many
You
other.
can see this in other municipalities. I have seen it in other jurisdictions, and you'll probably recall some of the efforts that are going on right
That's
now at the
right.
state level
Yep.
are directed to this exact concept. And actually, it's a lower number. It's more like 3 or 4%
Mhm.
that the mill levy increase could increase depending on how the valuation, it's a cap basically on how
Mhm.
much the generation of real property taxes can go up.
Yep.
Now, that wouldn't necessarily be directed at the municipality here, but it's not a foreign concept. It's been around.
How long have we had it? Since
Seven.
77, 78, we passed the charter. It's been in there since then.
I just didn't know.
That is 46 years, just so you know.
77.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's a motor vehicle tax and a franchise tax that are included in our tax revenues. So these are kind of the categories that we will present every fund to you guys in, instead of going through it line by line. For fees, we have business and building licenses, and then the new short-term rental license and administrative fee, liquor, tobacco, marijuana licenses, vendor, and animal licenses. And then festival attendance fee and building permit revenue. For intergovernmental, we have cigarette tax and retail marijuana sales. Fines and forfeitures include traffic fines, municipal code violations, and sales tax late fees. And then parks and recreation fees, campground revenue, recreation, pool revenue, showers, field and pavilion rentals, and reservation fees.
I have a question really quickly before we move on.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why festival attendance fees and building permits are on the same bullet point? Like, are those paired?
Nope.
Okay, okay.
And then we have contributions and transfers from other funds, which make up 7% of our general fund revenues for our 2024 budget. And these transfers are to ensure that utility and enterprise funds pay their fair share of administrative costs. Utility rates should be set to cover the full operating costs, including administration, preventing subsidization by the general fund, which, as I just spoke about, is mainly from taxes. The allocation method applies a percentage of department costs to cover administrative expenses across all funds. And this includes wages and benefits as well as other costs of the departments. And this is something that we do internally with finance and the town manager's office every year. And here you can see that our taxes are 71% of our total general fund revenues. Licenses and permits make up about 9%, and then those contributions and transfers from other funds, 7%. And for our taxes, 80% of sales tax, property tax, use tax, and motor vehicle tax stay in the general fund. And then 15% is transferred to that newly formed reserve capital improvement fund, and 5% goes to the open space fund. For business and building licenses, 20% is immediately transferred to the open space and reserve capital improvement fund. And then the remaining 80%, 6% stays in the general fund as an administrative fee, and 74% is paid to Marketing Telluride. And that's all in our municipal code. And this is a good overview of the 4 different taxes that the town collects. We have the 4.5% sales tax. 4% of that goes to the general fund and 0.5% goes to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then the food and lodgers excise tax of 2%. We retain a 2% administrative fee in the general fund for that. And then the remaining 98% is paid out to Telluride Montrose Air Org for airline guarantee program. Our short-term rental excise tax is 2.5%, and all of that goes directly to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then our town lodgers tax of 2%, which is the most recent tax the town started, all goes to the town lodgers tax fund. A little out of order here. Our general fund expenditures, we usually have about 55% as labor, which is really pretty low compared to other municipalities. And then purchase services make up 15% of that and transfers out. So mainly to the open space fund and reserve capital improvement fund, which has to be done, makes up that 14% of transfers. And these are the categories that we'll present our expenses in for every fund. So right now, our general fund, we started 2024 with a fund balance that's $2 million higher than projected during the budget process. Part of that is due to some changes our auditors have made in our sales tax, how we account for that, and bringing December 2023 into that number. We did implement the compensation study as of August 3rd, 2024. And as of right now, our revenues are trending a little bit below budget, mainly because of that sales tax being 2.5% down. And our expenditures are looking to be pretty close to on track, other than that implementation of the compensation study. Okay. Any questions on our general fund? We'll move on to the capital fund, which is one we spend a lot of time talking about. We always have a lot more requests for capital projects than we have funds for. The capital fund accounts for general government capital projects and almost completely funds the transportation fund and street bridge and alley fund. It is pretty much completely funded by that 3% real estate transfer tax. 80% of that stays in the capital fund, and then 20% goes to the reserve capital improvement fund and open space fund. And then 50% of our capital fund balance is transferred out to other funds. So with these transfers, and then in the past, we've also helped with some large capital projects for the wastewater and water fund and some of the housing funds.
Kaylee, what's the philosophy behind the reserve capital fund versus just the regular capital fund?
So that is what was created when we decided to reallocate those open space revenues a year ago. The
And they
reserve
couldn't go
capital
into just the
improvement
general
fund.
capital fund, they had to be.
We
in a
wanted to
reserve?
keep it separate.
Okay,
Yeah.
The thought was sort of wastewater and
Yes.
gondola and some of the like not too fun projects that we have coming up that we have to have a lot of money for. And since we've all for however long been just not even thinking about that 20% that just goes to pay off the valley floor. And then all of a sudden, where's it gonna go? We're like, we should just keep saving it and not think
not
about
pull it
using it.
in.
Yes, not get lost with all the other
Because we
capital.
know we're
Got
projects.
gonna
it.
need it for those too. Yeah.
So the idea being that it's almost like our savings account for our capital fund now, knowing that we have these other projects, but it's not specifically earmarked for anything in particular, or is it?
List of things.
I mean, I think it's earmarked to an extent. I think that we knew that there were, I mean, there's so many capital projects, but there are some very, very significant ones. And so we wanted to be able to allocate funds to those ones that are going to be so incredibly expensive, and keep that away from any sort of budget decision.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious.
Again, just our real estate transfer tax revenues, budget versus actual and the difference. Our audited beginning fund balance for our capital fund also started about $1.5 million higher than projected. We always have a lot of unspent carry forward balances from prior years in the capital fund. And then again, our real estate transfer tax is 6.18 million right now. Our budget is 6.2 million. Any other questions on the capital fund? We'll move on to the reserve capital improvement fund, which is used for various capital improvements, including but not limited to improving transportation services, improving the town's wastewater treatment facility, and acquisition of property for and/or the construction of employee or affordable housing. And this is the description in our municipal code, but we have definitely discussed kind of earmarking those for gondola and wastewater treatment plant. And we have been making a $2.1 million transfer to the wastewater fund out of this to save up for the wastewater treatment plant improvements. We've been working with our municipal advisors over the last month to see if this is really what we should be doing, or if we should be saving more for the gondola right now and putting less into that wastewater fund. So we'll continue to work with them and come back to you guys.
Is that a like 2.1 million transfer every year, or is that total?
Every year. So we started that this year.
That was my next
I think
question.
we did $500,000 last year,
Yep.
2.1 million this year, and that's kind of what we put in our wastewater study and water study that we did last year, but now we're rethinking
Yeah,
this.
so when we had an idea for the retrofit and what that would cost, this was the financial strategy based off of that. Obviously, the funding need hasn't changed, but the structure of how we're gonna fund it may, so we're just looking at
Okay.
what options we have.
And then this fund is funded by that 15% of sales and use tax, property tax, motor vehicle tax, business and building licenses from the general fund, and then real estate transfer tax from the capital fund. Okay, and then our open space fund is funded by 5% of all those same revenues now instead of the 20% that used to go there. And our open space fund is used to acquire and maintain open spaces, including debt payments for properties like the Valley Floor. And we were lucky enough to be able to pay off those bonds last year and reallocate some of these funds and still have a healthy fund balance sitting in our open space fund. And then in this fund, any unspent revenue is allocated to an open space set aside account to make this fund balance 0 for our budget. And the Affordable Housing Fund, the budget is the same. We have a affordable housing set aside account, so the whole fund balance is allocated there to have a 0 fund balance at the end of the year. And this fund is used for the development and preservation of affordable housing for the town. We have some very healthy revenue sources coming into this. We have 0.5% of the sales and use tax out of that 4.5%. Housing mitigation fees, which are charged on the building permits, a 2 mil property tax levy. And so that one will increase annually with the valuations going up. And then a 2.5% short-term rental excise tax, which was effective January 1st, 2020. And then new this year is the short-term rental regulatory fee at $857 per bedroom. And this fund is used to subsidize housing projects to keep rents lower than if the full cost of the project was financed.
Is that short-term rental tax 2020 or 2021? For some reason, my mind is
2020.
saying 21, but it's not.
I think 2020.
That was,
I thought it was passed in 20 and then went into effect. Am I wrong? Am I remembering wrong? It's not super
I
important.
remember it well.
It's on the ballot in 2019.
That
So
period is a time warp, obviously.
we have about $5.5 million in revenue budgeted for this year in our affordable housing fund.
2019, effective 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on the affordable housing fund?
Well, this is the budget, right? So we don't
This is the
have the
budget.
actuals yet.
We don't have any.
Well, of course, for 2025, but for 2020, or excuse me, it is on here, 2024.
Yeah, and we don't have that short-term rental sales tax in quite yet. So we don't have a good idea of where we are on this fund right now.
And that's that beigey color
That
that's on the top of the other two that's missing.
No.
That's the
No.
business license.
That's this is our budget for
changed
this
to
year.
2
One,
'cause it's regulatory
Oh.
now.
Got it.
Right, that was like, for 2 years, we had that.
oh yeah,
50% increase in business license fees that went straight to this, but then that expired. And now we have the
regulatory. fee.
regulatory fee.
Got it.
So in some, we're gonna have the 0.5% sales tax that's on STRs and 2.5% excise tax. that have not
Yes,
come in
that's correct.
either.
Yep, exactly.
It's gonna be a lot of money.
And short-term regulatory fee. Everything associated with short-term rentals we don't have in yet. Okay, so our enterprise funds consist of our water and wastewater fund, Shandoka, Virginia Placers, Sunnyside, Voodoo, and then our parking fund. And these funds are run similar to a business, so that means the services offered should predominantly be supported through user charges. And these are funded by user charges such as rent, late fees, and utility charges. Our water and wastewater funds account for, those water and wastewater services, as well as tap fees, which are charged on the building permit. And then our wastewater fund, we also get a 35% reimbursement from the Mountain Village on capital and operating expenses for the wastewater treatment plant. We've had some pretty large rate increases over the last 6 years, and looking forward, have some more coming up in the next 4 years. This year we had a 5% increase on water, 20% increase on wastewater. And we did do that rate study last year on both of these utilities. And they recommended another 5% increase for 2025 on water and 18% for wastewater.
These recommended increases go on forever, or do we eventually hit
We did a 5-year rate study last year, so we have 4 more years of.
So there's your answer.
Similar increases.
We feel like it's gonna be similar, like even next, like the next 5-year cycle, it's gonna still be that like same percentage increase.
Either depending on if we keep increasing rates or try to do a mill levy.
So this was again based off of when we did a rate study for our retrofit of the wastewater
Right.
treatment plant. So we are currently talking with Mountain Village, and when we assess the new site, maybe relooking at that rate study and those funding options. But because we know
Bless you.
the cost
Right.
of the potential cost, we're gonna keep on this path.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it seems similar.
Yep.
So, okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, and then the Telluride Housing Authority enterprise funds encompass Shandoka, Virginia Placer, Sunnyside, and Voodoo affordable housing units, including the long-term debt on the units and the cost to manage and maintain the affordable housing units. We had several years of very low rent increases or no increases at all in 2021, and then 1% in 2022. So we've kind of been making up for that the last 2 or 3 years. And then going forward, looking at more of a tiered rate structure. And then our parking enterprise fund is our last enterprise fund. And this is used for all parking related expenses, including signage, meters, debt on the Silverjack parking garage. And then our major revenues are on-street parking fees, Silverjack parking fees, parking permits, and parking fines. We've been doing quite a bit the last couple of years for our parking system around town. In 2021, we implemented the Park Mobile app. We increased meter rates to $2 an hour. And then we implemented a parklet use fee beginning in 2021 based on the hourly meter rates. Last year, we replaced all of the on-street meters as well as the Silverjack parking garage parking system. So this is kind of the first year that we're actually seeing consistent revenue come into this fund. We had a lot of meters down over the last year.
Yeah, and obviously for 2024, we completed the parking study, so we're gonna come to council with some rate adjustments or recommendations based on that study as well. We're also looking at our wayfinding program to help better educate people on the parking availability, and hopefully we'll see an increase in revenues just because of better signage as well, and other infrastructure. So we're continuing to evolve the parking fund.
All right, that's kind of the end of the bigger funds. We'll just move on to our smaller funds. We have a restricted fund, which is used, all these revenues have to be used for a certain purpose. Our revenues coming into this fund are paper bag fees, dog surcharge fee, tree fee, Parks and Rec donations, and Marshall's donations. So for example, that paper bag fee is what you're charged when you go to the grocery store and buy a bag, and then we turn around and use that to buy reusable bags. So what we've done in the past with that.
Yeah, that fund is restricted to buying
Yes.
reusable bags.
And then any additional revenue from the festival attendance fee is transferred from the general fund into the restricted fund.
What's the tree fee?
Tree fee is
I'm not quite sure.
also, I think that's.
Tree removal.
The tree
Yeah,
removal
tree
permit?
removal.
If it's like over
And-
6 inches in the town, you have to come and get a permit.
So I don't know what it's
plan.
restricted to, but maybe it's.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what we've
the
used that
town.
for. The Energy Mitigation Fund is used for energy conservation projects and to offset the town's carbon footprint. It is funded by green energy fees charged by the town through building permits. The two major revenue sources are the temp fee and the green building fees. This fund has contributed to funding the Sunnyside net zero projects, helps to fund the Green Grants program with Eco Action Partners. We also have purchasing trees for replacement programs in this fund, and it's used for climate action plan projects. The airline guarantee is that 2% excise tax on lodging rentals and sale of food and drinks served or furnished in restaurants and bars, effective January 1st, 2024. And then we keep 2% of that in the general fund as an administrative fee. The remainder is passed through to Telluride Montrose Air Org to support the airline services in Telluride and Montrose. Our Town Lodgers Tax Fund is a newer one as well, with that 2% Town Lodgers tax effective January 1st, 2020. It's used exclusively to fund activities related to tourism or marketing of the Telluride community and managing the effects of tourism on the community. Other purposes include, but are not limited to, improving the wastewater treatment facility, acquisition and construction of property for affordable housing, and transportation services. And we have $800,000 budgeted for marketing for this year coming out of this fund, as well as some of our, like, July 4th. The transportation fund is sort of a sub-fund of the general fund when it's presented in our audit, but we show it separately in our budget process. And it accounts for all the town's transit operations. It is funded mainly through a transfer from the capital fund. And those managers there have always been really good about getting some operating grants to help fund that. And then our debt service fund is used for special assessment debt service requirements, special assessment levies, geo debt, and lease purchase agreements. It's funded completely by transfer from the general fund. And right now we have about a $25,000 a year debt payment for the 2021 COP that's connected with the Marshalls building. And that was originally to finance the Pandora water treatment plant. And then we have the Child Development Fund for Elaine's Place starting this year. Management of that falls under the Community Services Department and is subsidized for this year $85,000 from the general fund. That's all the funds.
Great, thanks, Kaylee. Any questions from council?
Can you break down for us some of our enterprise funds, specifically affordable housing? A lot of the conversations we're having are revolving around that right now, and I would love a frank assessment of how those enterprise funds are operating and how close to our expenditures, our revenues currently are at.
So
Yeah,
our affordable housing fund is not one of our enterprise funds.
Well, the individual, no, not the affordable housing funds, but
yeah.
the specific Shandoka, Virginia Placer, Sunnyside.
So I don't know if you have the budget calendar in front of you, but we
Yeah.
will be diving into enterprise funds specifically for that, Dan. And understanding where we are, those operating costs, all of those details. The purpose of this meeting was to give very high level, so we can, I don't know if you have any of that prepared at the moment, but we will be concentrating on a specific budget date. as
Would it
well.
be possible, would it be possible to maybe even just get like, I don't know how your department operates, but like, could you run a profit and loss for each of these enterprise funds just simply from the last like 5 years without any like, you don't need to give any interpretation or anything like that and
Yeah.
maybe circulate that to everyone just so that we can have it.
Yep.
I don't mind looking. at
Just the enterprise funds
I
or
think-
everything.
Well, I mean, I am particularly interested in our affordable housing projects enterprise.
Okay.
funds.
I think that's fine. Just, I mean, I don't mind getting raw numbers and looking
Yeah,
at them.
we can definitely do that.
That'd be great.
From the last 5 years, not.
Sure.
Sure.
Whatever you think is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Or comments on anything else you want to see?
I guess I have a question. You said early on in the presentation that we have like 8 million in our reserves, 8.1 or something. And that seemed really high. Is there a reason that number was so high?
In the
Or is-
capital reserves?
I
Our
think
general fund.
I think it was the general
Mm.
fund. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
was just curious why that number was so high.
It's been building up. That balance has just been increasing every year.
There's
like-
probably a percentage that would be considered healthy for a reserve. So like if it's 6
Yeah.
months of operating or a
That
year of
is
operating.
6 months of operating.
Yeah.
So if our budget in a
30.
year is like, what's our budget? For instance, what percentage, I guess, is that 8.5
Mm.
towards our budget right now?
Yeah. Can you give the
50.
overall, what's our
It's-
reserve policy?
Yeah,
Just
our
state
reserve
that.
policy is 30% in our general fund of expenditures. So that 8.1 is about 6 months of expenses.
And the other thing that Kaylee mentioned earlier too is that we budget for a lot of jobs that that have been sitting empty for months. So we're not
Mhm.
paying those salaries out. So that money is just building up in reserves, although it won't continue that way, hopefully, when we hire people to fill those vacancies.
We
And
did.
it's also,
Go ahead, Kaylee.
That's also something that we could use to
Yeah.
help fund larger projects in the future.
Like these large infrastructure projects we have
Yes.
looming.
Yeah.
Is that, would we, for instance, like this year, we talked about, I don't know the final numbers obviously on this year, but like if, since we did do like, based on our compensation studies and stuff like that, we adjusted salaries, is that where we could potentially pull from, is from that, or do we just?
We, at this point, right now, we're really just looking at not dipping into the reserves for that aspect and trying to come up with a budget, a balanced budget, given our revenues and expenses. I think rather than increasing operational costs and relying on reserves to supplement that, we either can look at our reserve policy and see if we want to change that so that we maybe have more funds available, or yeah, I don't think it's good budgeting practice to increase an operational cost at thinking that you're going to pull from reserves to supplement that.
Even for 1 year.
I don't, and
'Cause-
because it's salary based, it's not a 1 year
But
thing.
next year being, or don't we have a big increase this year based on our study?
That was
We
my
have that
question.
We
shown.
will have a big increase this year, but that's in perpetuity.
Sure,
Yep.
but next year it'll be in the budget, and this year we just have to meet it.
Right. So maybe for this year, I don't know if we need to do it for this year at this point, but we'll look, but we're budgeting for 2025, which is what we're talking about right now for the operational expense. Yeah.
And are we thinking we want to keep that 50% as a new policy,
The 50%.
reserves?
Oh,
Because that's what we're at right
Yeah.
now, right?
I
Our
sort of
po-
remember
We've
we
been-
were at 30% was our policy forever,
Yep.
and then Scott was like, I really think we should get it up more,
mhm,
and now we're at 50. So
mhm.
should we rewrite the policy so that we're following?
Well, our written policy still says 30%.
That's what I'm saying. So I feel like from an outside perspective, people might come in and say, well, your policy is 30%, so why aren't you spending this money?
I think it's probably time to update those reserve policies.
Mhm.
And adjust it to the 50%.
I mean, it's up to us.
I think we should look at
Yeah.
it this year. and-
I mean, maybe not 50, maybe
Yeah.
scoot it up to 40 for now and then kind of see how it goes. Like if we have a year where, if the gondola's closed for a full year, our sales tax numbers may be down.
Mhm.
We may have to dip into it because of that, but you don't want to plan on dipping into it, just not knowing.
I think it's just, we're in the constant swing of,
Mhm.
it's our job to use money that comes into the government to support the community and to support people and to try and not put projects off where inflation will make them more expensive, et cetera. And so what is the balance of saving versus we have money, let's use it on an annual basis?
Yeah, and I think that's where my question came up, is that seemed higher than years past when you were showing some of the graphs. And so I was wondering, like, why is it so much higher?
I feel like the conversations we were having there where we were all concerned were the honeymoon period of COVID is over and the economy is gonna dip and airline travels down and we're worried that this is gonna be a really tough year. And I think obviously inflation has bolstered some of our sales tax revenues, even though inflation is down and occupancy is down, but yeah, it's really hard to know. what the
Yeah, I think we can
reality is.
come to you guys with talking points on our reserve policy. at
Cool.
Another budget meeting and also look at comparable communities. I know 35% is pretty standard, but we can see what others are doing as well. And Colette brings up great points. I mean, that's exactly why you have your reserves. Is for instances like the gondola shutting down or, whatever else
Yeah,
might be out
kind of
there.
But hopefully the gondola shutting down, we will have foresight of when that is happening and could potentially budget in for that.
Mhm.
Maybe,
Mhm.
reserves I've always thought about was like, you have something like COVID happen, which, we could talk about whether or not that was beneficial or not for tax revenues, but you have some sort of catastrophe happen and that causes your revenues to come down. That's why you have such a healthy reserve, is that then you don't have to furlough people or stop services or things like that. You can continue functioning. So hopefully with the gondola, we'll know in advance. And
Right.
can do a little bit more strategic planning. We're not going to just draw completely on that.
No, that's a good point,
Yeah.
Ashley.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
That was a great presentation.
Everyone feel like experts on the town's budget now?
No.
No.
We're gonna get deeper into it,
Yeah, we'll
so.
go through each fund.
Yeah.
In a lot more detail over the next 2 months.
Can you
3
put
months.
the timeline back on, just so everyone again has a, and if there's any questions or
And this
suggestions?
definitely could change depending on what we're ready to present to you guys.
So obviously their next hope is to do a general fund overview. So if there's any, again, I'm gonna go through this just to see if anyone has any other comments like Dan and Ashley had of what they'd like to see in some of these budget presentations. Obviously, we're then gonna go to the general fund and revenue estimates and fees. So fees is gonna be one, we'll make some suggestions to our fee schedule. Capital funds and enterprise funds. So we got some good input on what we'd like to see for that as well. And then a deeper dive into, or excuse me, enterprise capital and then enterprise funds, and then any of those other funds like the restricted funds that we saw. And then hopefully in November, look to adopt that budget.
I would love to address in the capital fund discussion. How are we gonna deal with these deferred projects? Do they just, I know this ties into our goals and objectives and being realistic about how much we can get done. But is there a time when some of these projects, if they're not able to get executed, that budget approval expires or gets reconsidered? Like
Yeah.
how, because we're 2-3 years behind on some things.
I think that'd be great to discuss
Yeah.
that during our capital discussion.
Any other questions or input? Right.
I don't have anything.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. It was great. Anything else to add?
Nothing else to add? I think we. An executive.
Right on time.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Right on time, an hour early.
I was like, we're early.
Call the planet early. Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 2. Once again, Colette and Kaylee, thank you so much. Executive session. Executive session is for the gondola for a conference with the town attorney for the purposes of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations and or instructing negotiators. PRS section 24-6-4024E and section 4.6.c of the Telluride Home Rule Charter. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Elena, a second from Ashley. Elena, how do you vote?
Elena, yes.
Ashley, yes.
Daniel.
And Teddy, yes. We will go into executive session. Time is now 11:27. The executive session has been concluded. The participants in the executive session were
Ashley Von Sprecken.
Ellen 11.
Teddy
Kevin.
Erico, Kevin Geiger, Zoe Denal. That's everybody. For the record, if any person or participated in the executive session believes that any substantial discussion of any matters not included in the motion to go in the executive session occurred during the executive session, or that any improper action occurred during the executive session in violation F of the open meetings law, I would ask that you state your concerns for the record. Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is adjournment by mutual consent.